Rob, I know you still have a full head of hair, but you're a little bit closer to retirement than me. How do I know if I've saved enough?
Well, Jimmy, there are some rules of thumb to help you understand that. And by the way, I am not as old as I look, or I'm older. Anyway, we're going to get into it in this episode of Last Paycheck.
I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way.
Welcome. You are watching or listening to the latest episode of Last Paycheck, and I am your co-host, Rob Hoxton, and my other co-host over here is Jimmy Sutch. We are financial planners at Hoxton Planning and Management, and this show is brought to you by Hoxton Planning and Management. And today, we're going to be talking about some of the things that maybe focus on our lesser nature as human beings, where we're always worried about what everybody else is doing and whether or not we're keeping up with the Joneses. So today, we're actually going to talk about, at various ages, how much, on average, people have saved for retirement and whether or not you're on track. So I think we should jump right into it. I'm glad you're here today, Jimmy.
Happy to be here again. This is our first one together, and we're both stepping in for Archie, so we're going to do our best.
Yeah, Archie is out of the office this morning with an unexpected, not serious, but medical thing. So we're going to try to fill his boots, which is not so easy to do.
So this is always a fun exercise to do, and we actually get this question a lot with clients that we work with, but very commonly they ask us, have I saved enough for my age, right? Is a very general question. Again, we tend to walk them through financial planning strategies and things like that, but kind of there's some rule of thumbs, right? What do you have for us, Rob?
Well, I'm going to start by saying if you're trying to keep up with the averages, that's not a great thing to do.
It's not a great benchmark.
Yeah, that's
right.
Not a great benchmark. So everybody can fail together, right? But yeah, so I guess what we have for you is we've got just the first rule of thumb by age is how many times your annual salary you should have saved. And so if you're a married couple, or then you probably have to double this number. But if you're 30, the rule of thumb is that you have saved 1 year's worth of salary.
And a good metric really is probably household income then.
Yeah, household income.
Fair?
Yep, good point. At age 40, 3 years worth of salary, 50, 6 years worth of salary. At age 60, 8 years worth of salary, and at 65, 10 years worth of salary.
Right. So if you're 65 and you have a household income of $100,000, you got to hit the $1 million mark.
That's right.
Based on rule of thumb. We do push back quite a bit, right? Because we do have people that maybe haven't saved quite as bit, but live relatively modest lives.
Yeah.
Right. So $1 million or a few dollars less goes much farther for somebody who likes to drive the newest car or have a pool in their backyard.
That's right. And, and the numbers vary for every person. I mean, some people, if they're lucky, might even have one of these old-fashioned pensions, right? So if you have a pension, maybe you don't have to save quite as much.
Right.
But those are rules of thumb, and they're, take them for what they are. They're just rules of thumb. Everybody's situation is different. And we think, having a financial plan where you actually take into consideration your spending habits and the lifestyle that you live is probably the best way to do it.
Of course.
And by the way, I should say that we do have this really handy little guide that we'll send you if you leave a comment, which will help you sort of know on average what you should have set aside. So let's talk about what people have actually saved.
That's fair.
You want to touch on that?
Sure.
This comes from a 2022 survey from a survey of consumer finances.
So what have people actually saved, right? And of course, this will be as predicted, right? The older you get, the more dollars you have in your pocket or in your IRAs or 401ks. But under 35, we come in at just shy of $50,000, so $49,130. From 35 to 44, and I think depending on sex, your primary or highest earning years are around 50 ballpark, but between 35 and 44, you're at about 142,000. from 45 to 54. So that starts getting in highest earning years of your career. Your savings is about 313,000 on average. And then from 55 to 64, you have about 537,000 on average saved up. Right. Those numbers actually are surprising because they're a little bit better than I would have guessed walking in here, right? Because, like Fidelity has done multiple surveys, but it's really hard for people even to get their hands on $1,000 in a bank account, let alone a couple hundred in retirement accounts.
I would agree because I saw a study not long ago where I thought I read that the average household savings in this country was like 35,000.
Right. So I think some of these surveys, you kind of got to look into the weeds a little bit, but some don't consider IRAs. Some only take into consideration 401ks.
It also depends on their sample group, like who are they actually asking?
Right.
So if you're walking down the sidewalk in New York City and it's rush hour and everybody's trying to get to work.
Right.
Those are all people that are probably working, have relatively high level of compensation just because of where they are.
Right.
So that might skew the results. I don't know. We don't really know what the methodology was in that survey, but it is interesting. And you can see that in the scenario that you gave, 10 times, we use that rule of thumb at 65, 10 times salary. So if you apply that to these averages, then this is saying that the average person at age 60, between 55 and 64, is earning only $54,000 a year.
Exactly.
That seems kind of low.
Right.
I'm going to guess that the vast majority of Americans are probably not even saving enough to hit those rules of thumb.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's right.
I mean, if we just kind of read between the numbers.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, then we should probably talk about why do you think that is such a problem? Why do you think people are under saving?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's largely a behavioral thing, but I'm the old grouchy guy. I know that people have legitimate reasons why they don't save. I think that usually it's just a behavioral issue.
I would agree. I think most of it probably is behavioral, right? So, that might be the Dave Ramsey approach a little bit, right?
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
But there is something called present bias, right? So we all need to address like our immediate needs, right? If we have to keep food in the pantry or a roof over our head, we're certainly going to meet those needs.
True.
Prior to saving for our later years, right?
Yeah.
Humans behaviorally, right, we tend to procrastinate, right? So that's probably in our nature a little bit more than it should be. But
that's true because I think about it as I'm 60 and I know that when I was 45, it seemed like I would never get to retirement age. It just seemed like it was so far in the future.
And you blink an eye, and now you have multiple grandbabies.
That's right. I have multiple grandchildren and, retirement's not that far in the future. And fortunately, I put money in a 401k and kind of put it on autopilot. So I have some money to retire on. But if I hadn't, I'd probably be in kind of a worrisome state at this point.
Well, if we divorce ourselves from human flaws, what are some of the other issues?
Well, everybody has other things that are vying for your financial attention, right? So when you're young, you probably
maybe a wife,
that's right. Or maybe you just got out of school and you have student debt, right? So if you got to pay the student debt, then you can't put money in your retirement account,
of course.
And then just about the time you finish the student debt, then it's time to send your kids to college.
That's fair,
right? And so then you're preoccupied with that, and you're kind of sliding into your peak earning years, and suddenly you have maybe elderly parents that need some support. Uh-huh. So it's like I can see how it's hard to kind of
playing catch up.
Yeah, it's hard to get your legs under you.
Right. So. And on top of that, really, and you see multiple studies done about this pretty commonly, but it seems as if wages haven't necessarily kept pace with the cost of living. Right. So it just gets harder and harder for somebody to want to go out there and have a family, go buy a small house, and you have to make more money than you had in the past to get something similar or have a similar lifestyle.
Well, when you need an extra job just to buy your eggs,
Right. That's fair. That's fair. So. What about Something that's pretty common among young workers is something we call the gig economy or freelancing.
Oh,
right? So it's pretty common now for people to have unusual, not necessarily 9 to 5s, and oftentimes that comes with losing some benefits. One of those benefits might be like a 401k or 403b.
oh, because they're basically independent
They're
contractors.
exactly right. They're 1099s, and so it takes a little bit more than just kind of selecting a percentage to set aside, and they don't have an employer putting in for them because they're 1099s. So sometimes that route just sets you back a little bit, especially if you have to invest in the business too.
Yeah, because I guess in that case, you really are a small business owner,
Exactly.
right? So you almost have to think in terms of that. And, I don't know that those gig companies really allow you to have enough of the fee that's being charged to be able to really provide yourself with those benefits.
Right. And so you do see sometimes people having, their standard 40-hour job and then something a little bit on the side. But
so their heart might be in the right place, but there's just not
Right.
enough. The math just doesn't work to be able to save.
that's right. And in the past, this is another thing I think is an assumption that is a little bit of a fallacy. But in the past, when we would go out and do these presentations to, hundreds of employees, the companies or whatever it may be, there was oftentimes an assumption that Social Security was that this net that was going to catch them. And hey, if I come up short on my retirement savings, hey, I'm good. I'm going to have a pension from the federal government at some point. And when Social Security was created, it was only ever intended to cover a small amount of your overall needs in retirement.
Yeah, I mean, it is a safety net, security. Yeah.
Exactly. So sometimes I think people do have a perception that Social Security is going to be a little bit bigger of a benefit than it's going to be.
And it used to be that Social Security would send you every few years, and I can still see it. It was a green and white report that showed what your earnings history was and how much money you were going to get in retirement benefits. Well, they don't really do that anymore. If you want to get that, you actually have to go to the Social Security website,
Right.
and actually set up a username and password and prove who you are, and then you can get the report that you can print. So most people have really no idea how much they're going to have in Social Security benefits.
That's true. But yet they are confident it's enough.
That's right. Well, yeah, and it's funny that you say that, Jimmy, because sometimes what I hear, and you may as well, is people will say, well, other people live on this, so I'll be able to be fine too. Well, that may or may not be the case. It depends on your situation. It depends on where you live.
Of course.
I mean, Social Security benefits they don't differ based upon what metropolitan area you're in. So if you're in the New York metropolitan area, for instance, the cost of living is the same, but your Social Security benefit is going to, if we earn the same amount of money over our careers, your Social Security benefit is going to be the same as mine living on a farm in West Virginia.
Right. It goes a little bit farther on a farm, right?
Goes a little bit further. Plus I can always grow my own food, right? It's kind of hard to do that in Brooklyn.
So those are some of the, I guess, challenges or reason why people are undersaving, right? If you're behind, which most of us are, if you're behind, what are some of the things we can do to catch up?
Yeah, you got to start saving more.
You got to.
Yeah, and that's not easy, but there are some hacks, right? There's some things that you can do to make it a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. For me, where I find success and where I try to encourage people, especially young people that have little ones and diapers to change and things like that, is to automate everything, right? If you can automate something, and a reason why a lot of young people have success in their 401ks is because it's automated, right? Regardless of the headlines, regardless of what's going on at home, or regardless of what they're paying Spotify, right? They're automatically putting that 5% aside into their 401k.
Yep.
So if you kind of use that same exercise amongst an IRA or a brokerage account or even at the bank, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to help.
Yeah, and it's kind of this old concept of pay yourself first and live on what's left. I think that's kind of the same sort of thing. And even with your 401k, if you make sure that you put enough in to maximize the match from your employer, you don't want to leave that money on the table.
Free money.
Free money.
Free money.
I see people leaving it on the table and not taking advantage of that all the time. You can also build in an escalator. So each year you're increasing a little bit, maybe a percentage a year until you get to a target percentage that's somewhere between 10 and 15% of your pay. That's what you want to try to get to. But if you're getting older and you're behind, you got to really get serious about that. Another thing you can do is you can always delay when you retire.
That's not always a fun conversation with our clients.
No,
it's
that's
not.
True.
But you certainly can. And some people are required to do that, especially if they prioritize a higher amount of spending, over their retirement. So sometimes you can modify expectations, and sometimes you can modify when you retire.
Yeah. Another thing you can do is you can work on the expenses too, right? So if you think about your financial life like you might a bucket, and you have a spigot at the top, which is your income coming into this bucket, if you have lots of little holes, that's going to keep you from accumulating as much in that bucket as you need. So look for places to plug those holes. One is to try to find ways to save on taxes.
Yep.
Right? If you can save money on taxes, it doesn't necessarily affect your lifestyle, but it does affect how much gets built in that bucket for retirement. Mm-hmm. Then there are the other obvious ones. You can look for unused subscriptions and services. And if you're buying diapers for a grandchild or something, just make sure that the parents wash those diapers at least once before they dispose of them.
Yeah.
So use them twice. I don't know.
Well, I think for young people, especially people starting out, I think one of the things that we fall into is this willingness to dump our money into things that are depreciating assets instead of appreciating assets, and one of those things being a vehicle.
Oh.
And so I think that, the average car payment is $500 or $600, and maybe even north of that the last time I read that Fidelity study. So, you can kind of be a little bit more modest in some situations if it allows you to get ahead, right?
Yeah.
It does take some sacrifice, right? But
that's great, Jimmy. That's perfect advice. But you know what? I think we're running out of time. That just about does it for today. If you found this interesting, we've got over 100 episodes now, and if you add up the shorts, we're like over 400 videos on YouTube. So make sure that you check it out, that you subscribe, you hit the bell for notices, and tell your friends, and make sure if you want a little bit of information, this checklist that we've put together, leave a comment in the comments, and we'll make sure to get it to you.
You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.